Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. You may recall a few days back, we actually got some pretty interesting insight from a former lead developer at Call of Duty. Sledgehammer Games former creative director Greg Reisdorf recently has been posting a whole bunch on Twitter talking about various design elements and gameplay things and just development insights with gaming in general. He's not specifically always talking about COD, but a lot of it can be correlated directly to COD, considering he was just the lead on a game that came out not that long ago in Modern Warfare 3. And recently, in addition to some of the things that we've covered previously, he detailed even more things, kind of calls out Call of Duty for a few of their practices, what works and what doesn't when it comes to just in general making the game more replayable, giving us as players an incentive to come back to Call of Duty. The whole retention thing in COD has really skyrocketed in recent years. Call of Duty is so insanely focused on retention being the #1 metric they're after in their games that a lot of the things that they've done start to feel like chores rather than fun things to do in a video game. This was something Greg alluded to in some previous tweets that we've covered, and he goes a bit more in depth on some things here. And like I said, in a way, kind of calls out Call of Duty. So first up, he says this: what actually works? This is in regards to making a game replayable, basically. Challenge-based systems tied to real gameplay. Systems that reward the right behavior, like playing the objective, helping your squad, and using a new strategy. Right away, you can sort of bring this back to Modern Warfare 3, which was one of the most successful Call of Duties ever in terms of post-launch support, not only in what the devs provided, the best post-launch support in terms of quantity and quality of updates throughout MW3 season after season. They knocked it out of the park, but also with community sentiment. MW3, as opposed to other titles, BO6, MW2, etc., that we have data for, was actually sustaining a player base throughout the years you got into season 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whereas MW2 and Black Ops 6 have dropped players off season after season after season in that same time frame. So what Modern Warfare 3 did worked, and I feel like he's kind of calling back to that. He also mentions that they did it in World War II, which is such a strange Call of Duty, and funny enough, it actually just came to Game Pass not that long ago. But with COD World War II, it started off as just a very not great game is a blunt way to put it. The gameplay systems, obviously it's a World War II game, so the hype for it was a little bit skewed, as is. People don't love the past era games with Call of Duty gameplay in specific, just because of creativity, it being limited a little bit more maybe there as opposed to a modern game or a futuristic game. But then halfway through World War II, they did some overhaul updates. Sledge did some major changes to the game, completely reworked so many fundamental systems in the game. From a content standpoint, from a replayability standpoint, was phenomenal. The overhaul update for World War II, I think, will probably go down as one of the single most game-changing updates in Call of Duty history. And a big thing that they did with this was focus more on rewarding players. Greg goes on to say, let players choose their challenges. This is something that actually stuck back in World War II with the contract system. It was very similar to daily challenges, weekly challenges, if you will, like what we've seen throughout Call of Duty, just as like the basic, hey, here's your 3 multiplayer daily challenges, go have fun. Or the aftermarket part, the weekly challenge system that we had back in Modern Warfare 3, being able to pick and choose between, 7 different challenges, for instance, complete 5 of them between multiplayer, zombies, warzone. They could be anything from getting kills with rifles to using certain equipment to winning in certain modes. It offered a lot of variety in what it allowed you to do, and in the end, you got a good reward. In World War II, they would go through, they'd give you a bunch of contracts you could pick and choose from. At first, these weren't anything too major. It was XP bonuses, it was small things here and there. Ultimately, they changed it to more rewarding things, though, which was a huge deal and a massive W for the community. Greg goes on to say, they stuck with what matched their style and stayed longer. He's talking based off of data that he found. When you gave the community a chance to pick and choose their own adventure, if you will, in terms of how they want to unlock content, players stuck around. That was a winning formula. And it's insane to think about that he's using World War II as an example here, a COD that came out a long time ago. They found a formula that worked, and they haven't revisited it all that much. Modern Warfare 3 did to an extent, so certainly it's something that Sledgehammer sees is a system that they want in their games. Hopefully that continues now, even though Greg is no longer a part of Sledgehammer, but they had that winning formula back then. It was just implemented in a COD that didn't have a large player base or a large fan base behind it, but they haven't revisited it even in successful iterations of the game, which I think is rather strange. Greg closes this initial tweet out by saying, stop trying to stretch players across every part of your game. Let them go deep, let them become obsessed. That's where the long tail lives. So just sort of explaining, hey, if you're just trying to make players, span whatever it is, it might not work. If you let them go in on what they enjoy, they're going to stick around longer. We also initially get an interesting response from Greg as well on a very controversial topic in COD, supply drops. These were hated back in the day because, quite frankly, the systems behind them were not good. It was just monetizing the heck out of the game with terrible odds. The supply drop system in COD was always incredibly flawed. Greg gets responded to on this initial tweet saying, World War II by far had one of the best grinds due to the collections, the contracts, and the orders across multiplayer and zombies, as we were alluding to there. There was things to grind, and it was a nice choose your own adventure type scenario. Endless replayability, so many great cosmetics to earn for free, which is another huge thing with it. Definitely the best MTX system we've seen, since you could buy supply drops to earn those items faster, but you never had to. That's the big thing with supply drops, is for a long time it was, are you lucky enough to get this thing? If so, great, you can have it. If not, tough luck. Oh well. World War II gave you options. Yeah, you could buy them if you wanted to. If you didn't want to spend the time grinding them and unlocking them, there was a pay to earn it faster system that still probably could be tweaked for the better, right? But it gave you options, and that ultimately is a good thing. Greg says, I do agree on the MTX side. Supply drops without the ugly monetization, I think I would take over time pass any day, which is simply you have to play forever and ever and ever to get something, which may turn into that situation where, this feels like a chore to play the game rather than it being a video game for fun. That's not all Greg has kind of called out with Call of Duty though recently, which is an interesting insight as always. And of course, if you guys do enjoy the content as we're going through all the things that are being mentioned here today, a like rating is always seriously appreciated on the video. It really does help grow the channel, and share the video around. And if you guys are new here, you want to guarantee that each and every day you're always up to date with everything I'm posting, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. This next post from Greg is another interesting one in my opinion. He says, you don't need players to do absolutely everything. You don't need to have them be super diverse if you can nail what they enjoy. Let them go deep. Snipers should snipe. Grinders should grind. Weirdos should get weird. Design obsession loops, not obligation loops. I feel like this correlates really strongly with how Call of Duty has approached meta updates and weapon balancing throughout the titles as of late. It's just convenient that he also mentions, snipers should snipe, right? We're in this situation now, and I think this also ties directly into skill-based matchmaking being so strict in Call of Duty, where a lot of the times you feel like you are obligated to do certain things if you want to stand a chance in game. You really enjoy using this certain brand of weapons. Maybe they're, the different SMGs that aren't necessarily the meta, but you go in game and you use those off meta weapons that you really enjoy the feel of or the look of. You're going to get slammed by the meta choices because of skill-based matchmaking. It's going to put you in those sweaty lobbies where the better players are if you're decent at the game, right? And if you're trying to experiment, have fun, mess around, and max out things, or, go for mastery across the board, meaning you're going to use off-meta things. You're going to switch things up and not use the standard 2, 3, 4 guns that the best players are all spamming. Well, then you're going to get slammed. And then at that point, it's like you're obligated to use these guns. You're obligated to level up this so you can get this attachment, and you have to run this. You're obligated to run that, or you're going to be at a disadvantage. That is a losing system for player experience, I think, in a lot of cases, especially for the broad audience of COD, which is those casual players. So another interesting insight that does sort of line up with what we've sort of, I guess, theorized about the player experience for some time now. And then one final thing Greg mentions, he was posting about World War II being out on Game Pass. May your supply drops be abundant and your dupe rate be low. I'm recording this video a little bit in advance, of course, as I typically do, but he gets asked on this, how come the headquarters never returned after World War II, which is something we've talked about a few times. The broader community for COD has also mentioned this a lot. The HQ system, the headquarters in World War II, was awesome. Having this little open area where you could go through, you could see other players. There was the social tab. I'd always stand up by the leaderboard asking for like accommodations, right? So I could get my social score up and everything. It was a cool space. I think it was a really unique thing for COD, and they've never gone back to it. And players for years have asked, why hasn't this returned? And Greg does respond, is it actually highly requested? I think at the time people lampooned it, which is interesting because it was this brand new system, but then we look back on it, as we often do with Call of Duty, is, oh, this game sucks while it's out, and then a year later it's like, Well, actually, was it that bad? You know, it's always what happens with COD. But he goes, it was also very difficult to pull off and is a huge investment. And that ultimately is likely the reason that we haven't seen this re-added back into Call of Duty, is that it is a large investment to support the HQ system as a whole. And Call of Duty probably has larger issues, especially like in current times where the games just function really sporadically as is. They probably don't want to add an extra layer of depth to that they have to monitor and keep track of, to the point where people could load into an HQ lobby and cause all sorts of issues there. There could be major bugs happening there that then would be different from gameplay, but they still have to make sure that functions. Or if it's too broken, they have to remove it, then it's a terrible look. There's probably a risk versus reward that Call of Duty's maybe not necessarily willing to take with that system. But I do think it would be awesome to see that come back. As I talked about before when we first covered some of Greg's insight into game dev and what's going on with COD, it's a really cool POV, especially because he's so fresh out of the franchise, just having been a lead on Modern Warfare 3 and now off doing his different things here. It's cool to see the insight so directly and so bluntly as well. But that said, that is going to wrap things up for this one. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like. If you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day. And I'll catch you later. Peace out.